How do you measure performance of teams, players, schemes, etc. in the NFL? It can be very difficult as there are dozens, if not hundreds, of decisions that are made every single play by all 22 players on the field. Just as an example of this, let me break down some things that I see in this one NFL play that is one of just 130 to 150 plays that will happen in a single game. So let me start it here. First thing you see is guy goes in motion. Let me pause it here. So you see Calvin Austin goes left. This causes the defender to move with him and back off a little, giving him space, knowing that, especially in the modern NFL, motion means that the guy might go back, get a head start, so he's wants to give him a little more space. It also tips off to the offense that they're probably in man coverage because Brandon Stevens has been moving with Calvin Austin. And so now, when we play it, we get to the snap, pause it right here, we can see that everyone is rushing except the defenders who are in man coverage or one deep zone. This means that the defense is in cover one. They're trying to get pressure and hoping that their defensive backs can survive in man coverage long enough to get to the quarterback. So let's play it a bit more. Let's see what happens. Okay, see, the O line does not hold it very well. The Steelers' O line had not been playing great. And the Steelers counter this by running a bootleg to their right, where they fake the handoff to the left and roll Aaron Rodgers out to the right, hopefully giving him enough time to find one of his receivers who is matched up against one of the Jets' corners. Sure enough, that's exactly what happens. You can see it here, Brandon Stevens starting to slip. Let's go a little more. And he fully slips. You can see Calvin Austin is wide open. Aaron Rodgers has made a very difficult throw, very underrated throw, kind of falling back into his right to a receiver who is coming wide open. And the safety has no chance on this play. You can see the safety in the end zone for the Jets. He is about in the middle of the fields. He was giving inside help because it looked like Brandon Stevens kind of had outside leverage there, but he slipped, and that outside leverage was no longer anything important. So because of that, the safety is out of position, and we're going to see a wide open touchdown to Calvin Austin here. So I just broke down maybe 5 or 6 things I saw in this play, but there are so many other things you could have looked at. You could have looked at any single player on the field. You probably broken down what he could have done. Whether it was an offensive lineman, you could have looked at their technique, how they tried to sell the run and then slid into pass protection. Whether it was the cornerbacks, you could see what kind of leverage they were taking and how they tried to cover the receiver long enough just so the pass rusher would get home to Aaron Rodgers. My point being, just on this one play, there are so many different things that you can look at that would indicate performance of a single player and team. So how do you look at that for an entire single game, or even an entire drive? That's hard enough. But I'm thinking about, how do I even measure this for a game? And so, while I don't have any sort of mathematical proof of what I'm about to show you, if I'm going to model performance, I think that we can use a pretty interesting mathematical concept to look at this. That is the bell curve. So before I break down how this applies to football, let me just go into what exactly a bell curve is, in case you're not familiar. So obviously, this is not the bell curve I'll use for football. It's just probably the first one I saw on Google, so I threw it in here. But it breaks down the height of US women. So you can see on the x-axis, it shows heights. It goes from about 4'10" to 5'10", those being like the two extremes of women's height in the US. And the y-axis, you see frequency, or a more mathematical term for it, probability density. And what this chart is telling you is that most women fall between about 5'3" to 5'7", as you see in that little shaded red region. So the bell curve, the higher the curve is, the more likely it is for people to fall into that category. So what you see now is kind of a bare bones bell curve chart that I'm proposing to use to measure NFL team performance. I'll add more stuff to it as I go on, but I just want to break it down in chunks. So on the y-axis, you can see I have used a percentage sign, and that simply measures the same thing as the previous bell curve of women's height. That is the frequency or probability density, if you're a nerd like myself, that a team would fall in. So again, the higher the chart, the more likely it is for the team to play at that level. It's not often you see a really excellent performance from a team or a really, really, really bad performance for a team, most of the time, you're going to get something roughly in the middle. Now, on the x axis, you get performance. Again, this is a very abstract, unmathematical way that I'm going to be measuring performance. It's mostly just going to be using my eye test or what I've seen in the stats or other people's breakdowns of it. Very unabstract. So there might be a lot of disagreements when I do this for a team, but that's what I'm just going to call performance. Roughly, how well do I think a team played in a game? So you may be wondering what these little lines inside of the bell curve are. Again, if you're a nerd, you're probably wondering this, like myself. It's very interesting. But each line you see is one standard deviation. So that middle line is 50%. That represents the team played about average of their potential, I would say. That's going to be about the most likely outcome. And if I go one line over to the right, that is going to be 84%. That is, if I take that line and everything to the left, that's going to represent 84% of the bell curve area. That's how that works statistically. That means I think the team played pretty well. If we go one more line over, that's going to be about 97.5%. Again, everything to that line on the left is 97.5% of the chart, excuse me. And then if we go to the last one, that's over 99%. So that's going to be like the best possible outcome for the team. So I'm just going to have those lines there for a reference. Again, just for like statistically minded people, just so they kind of know like where that line is going to go. If you are not interested in this and do not care, do not worry. I'll have a little indicator of where the lines are, but I'll just include them just much more transparent though in the future. So again, I'll talk about this more later, but I think the great part about these bell curves is they can slide left and right. If the x-axis is performance, say the bell curve starts with that tail on the left, like basically on the x-axis. That means I think that that team at its floor plays like the worst football I've ever seen. But say as the season goes on and that team starts to play better, say they have some rookies who don't really get much playing time, but they start to show themselves to be solid players throughout the season, I could just adjust this bell curve more to the right as the season goes on. So you'll see this more in example, but I just want to talk about that now, that this bell curve will kind of be a sliding bell curve. So I put it right in the middle here. But as you'll see later on, the sliding bell curve actually makes a huge difference. So really quick, I'm just going to break this down for what it would look like for one team. So say I wanted to talk about the Steelers' performance in week one. I would put their little line on the bell curve a little to the right of average. I'd say at 60% of the bell curve. So I'm saying that the Steelers played decently well. They played above average, which is, why they won. I think you can see that with your eyes. Like there were some weak parts of the team, right? So the O line, was not great. I think the defense, maybe in typical Steelers fashion, was kind of loose between the 20s, but kind of buckled down when they needed to, especially at the end of the game. The Jets did score when they got to the red zone pretty well, but I think that was kind of just more good play on their part, not bad defense by the Steelers. But overall, I think the Steelers played a little above average. And so when I break a team like this down, like in an actual longer breakdown video, I'll talk about why I put the team's line there. But that's just how I'm going to put it there, is how well did I roughly feel they played? And so where I really think the magic happens with this bell curve is when you compare two teams. So onto this next chart, say I want to talk about the Steelers and the Jets game. I might put up a bell curve like this. So let's break this down from left to right. The first thing I noticed when I scan from left to right of this chart is that the green bell curve, or the one that corresponds to the Jets, which hopefully you would assume looking at this, starts further to the left than the Steelers. This means that I think the Jets are worse of a team than the Steelers. If they each played their average games, I would guess that the Steelers would win. The next thing I see is the little 80% for the Jets. And if you slide your eyes to the right and down a little bit, you'll see that little skinny green line on the green bell curve. That's about where I'd put the Jets' performance at. I think it was an 80% game. I think the Jets played really solid. I don't think there were any bad performances overall, except Brandon Stevens, but the O-line played well. I thought Justin Fields had a great game. Breece Hall looked great. The Jets defense looked much improved from last year. They were getting much more of a pass rush. Were very, very stout against the run. Jalen Ward and Kenneth Gainwell did not really have much room. So for those reasons, I put it at 80%. And then from the last slide, I put the Steelers at 60%. Note that I've changed their bell curve to yellow just because with two teams, I need to have them be the team's colors so it's clear whose is whose. So you can see that the Steelers' little skinny line there is further to the right than the Jets, which is why they won. I will always have the team that wins have their line further to the right, indicating that they still won. So overall, I think the Jets played better than the Steelers. However, they're just not that good of a team. So even though they're individual players and played better than they would on average, the Steelers still won because their team is better. I think just due to their like veteran presence, they're going to have a higher floor. Like when it comes down to the end of the games, I just believe in the Steelers more. So even though they didn't have as individually talented performances, they still etched out the win. And so the great part about this, right, is say like the Eagles and a not as great team, like say the Panthers are playing, you would expect to see a bigger gap in the peaks of those bell curves. So for the Steelers and Jets, even though I think the Steelers are better than Jets, the bell curves peak at roughly the same spot. Like it wouldn't take that great of a performance from the Jets to beat the Steelers. It'd probably just take like a 75% performance from the Jets to beat like an average performance from the Steelers, which on any given week could happen. Maybe the Steelers drop 3 passes. That sends them from a 50% to a 40% game, in which case the Jets kind of need like a 50% game to win. But say it's the Eagles and the Panthers. The Eagles' bell curve is probably going to be really, really far to the right, and the Panthers' bell curve is going to be very far to the left. Because relatively, I think the Eagles are a much better team than the Panthers. So the Panthers would probably need like an 80% performance to beat like even a 20% performance from the Eagles. Like it's still pretty likely, but it's not going to happen that often. I mean, if you really want to break it down, you do like 80% times 20%, and that would be roughly what I would say the chances of the Panthers winning are. Again, this is pretty abstract for now, so I'm not going to do any statistics like that. But hopefully you're getting the picture of roughly like what I mean when I throw off a bell curve like this. So again, this is not a scientific or mathematically proven way to analyze team performance. I just think it's really helpful just to visualize. I think there's a lot of information just on this chart. So when I break down games in the future, I'll probably just throw a graphic up for every game that I've watched. If I haven't watched the game, I'm probably not going to make a bell curve like this. It's because I'm not going to rely on just the stats or what I've heard from other people to make my bell curve. I'm actually going to use my own like eyes and watching the game to draw information to create this. So if you disagree about this this bell curve idea to measure team performance, that's okay. It's not very mathematical. Maybe in the future I'll come up with like statistically proven ways to measure team performance. But before I wrap this up, I also just want to bring up that I think this could be a really interesting way to model player potential, particularly as well. Like say there's a guy coming into the NFL, say Josh Allen's coming into the NFL. We're making a bell curve and we're going to represent how good do we think he's going to be. So again, same axes as this team performance would have, like how likely it's going to be on the Y, performance on the X. So say maybe the 50% outcome on Josh Allen as a prospect is like Jay Cutler. I could be totally off on Jay Cutler, but when I remember and have heard of him, guy with a pretty big arm, not a great mind for the game, but very much carried just by like his physical tool, i.e. his arm, which that was kind of the main thing on Josh Allen as a prospect. Like not very accurate, maybe not the best mind for the game at the moment, but bazooka arm. So maybe like at his ceiling in a 50% scenario, so just average, he'd be something like Jay Cutler. A solid quarterback, but nothing spectacular. And maybe like the 10% outcome, so pretty far to the left on his bell curve, would be someone with just a big arm and not much talent. Maybe a little early to throw Joe Milton over there. Maybe someone like Hendon Hooker or like Jamarcus Russell if you want to go back like 20 years. that would maybe be the low outcome where, yes, toolsy player, but just never is going to make it in the league because he's unable to develop just the mind, the knowledge, and the accuracy. But say we go to the other side of the bell curve, like the 5 or 10% outcome. I think it's hard to come up with one for Josh Allen, but this was actually not a great idea to put Josh Allen in this, but maybe like his 10% outcome, or let's just put Josh Allen on the far right. I don't really know if there's a player like Josh Allen. Maybe his like 10% outcome is like Randall Cunningham. I'll throw that up on the screen. Bam, Randall Cunningham. That's like the 10 or 20% outcome there. Like maybe pretty rarely, but like Josh Allen could be something like Randall Cunningham. So I think for prospects, it's a really interesting way to look at their potential talent. Like the bell curve maybe is much tighter for a guy who's not super toolsy, but is coming to the league with a great mind for the game, and maybe like 5-year college player, like low RAS score. He maybe have a very skinny bell curve. Where I've given Josh Allen a super wide bell curve because as a prospect, we knew his floor was very low, but his ceiling was extremely high. So I don't know. I'm not really into analyzing draft prospects. Yeah, I simply don't have time for that. Right. But I think that there's some potential for it to go there as well. I just wanted to bring that up. So if you made it this far in the video, just let me know what you think of this bell curve. Let me know if you think it's helpful. But in the future, I'll probably be using it just to give some visual representation of the game when I talk about it on screen. Like the last episode, my very first episode of Breakdowns, I literally just had Football Reference up, and I was just brainstorming what could be something better to throw on screen when I talked. And I think this bell curve thing, while not perfect, is pretty interesting. And I think just as a data and math guy, it's really helpful to me. So that's it. Hope you have a good one. Make sure to like and subscribe to the Fans Coach, and I'll see you in the next breakdown.